This week's episode of Failed Presidential Candidates, we've got the RepublicanWish.com version of Bernie Sanders, or Ron Paul. Born August 30th, 1925 in Pittsburgh to the son of a dairy company owner, he grew up in what sounds like a very upper-middle-class household and would go on to Gettysburg University where he majored in biology before going on to Duke University to get his doctorate of medicine. Guys, this might be our first politician who doesn't have a law degree. I mean, he's not. There's a few out there, but they are few and far between. He then served as a flight surgeon in the United States Air Force from 63 to 65 and in the National Guard till 68. After that, he moved to Texas and opened up a private practice in gynecology. I had a lead-up joke for that, but nope, not gonna say it. But as a gynecologist, he helped deliver Selena, the famous Hispanic singer, not the Disney one. Damn near April and it's 10 degrees outside, so rest of the video's from here. Anyway, with a political ideology influenced by Ayn Rand, because, fucking libertarians, which is weird because despite being the poster child for libertarians, he never actually served as a public official as a libertarian, always a Republican. He decided to get into politics when old Tricky Dick ended America's participation with the Bretton Woods system, which was basically our last very loose ties to the gold standard, the system that backed US currency by gold in some form or fashion. Ron didn't like that idea, he doesn't like the Federal Reserve, he doesn't like fiat currency, which I can't say I disagree with all of that, but that was his motivation to get into politics. Anyway, he ran for the 22nd Congressional District in Texas and lost. And his opponent, Robert Casey, was appointed to the Federal Maritime Commission by Gerald Ford, so there was a special election, which he then won. And then the year after that, there was another regular election, which he lost, but the margin was like 300 votes, so a year after that, there was a runoff election, and then he won again his seat back that he had lost, and then won, and then lost, and then won. During these years in Congress, he was vocal on his criticisms of banking management, of the Federal Reserve, and his wish to go back to the gold standard. He opposed bipartisan things like draft registration and advocated for term limits for congressmen, which, I agree with both of those things. During this time, though, he also founded the Foundation for Rational Economics and Education, which was a nonprofit think tank dedicated to pushing propaganda for free market economics and small government, because, you can't be GOP or a libertarian without standing for rich people. And to double down on being big business's bitch, he would go on to chair Citizens for a Sound Economy, which is literally just a Koch brothers lobby group. If you don't know who the Koch brothers are, they are literally everything the right accuses George Soros of being. Just a couple of douchebag oil men who spend their immense wealth and all of their time and energy trying to not pay taxes, not be regulated, and get the worst human beings on earth elected to office to do their bidding. The Koch brothers and the CSE, which Ron Paul chaired, is what gave us the Tea Party, and the Tea Party eventually gave us MAGA, so, thanks for that, Ron. In 1984, after spending his entire congressional career up to this point on his knees for the poster childs for special interests, Ron Paul announced his retirement from the House of Representatives to run for Senate because, and I quote, special interests have replaced the concern that the founders had for the general welfare. No fucking shit, huh? Anyway, after that, he lost his primary race for a Senate seat. He went back to private practice for a while, and during this time founded the Ron Paul Freedom Report and the Ron Paul Survival Report. These were Fox News-style newsletter publications before Fox News was a thing. And they would get him in hot water some years later because of a lot of blatantly racist and homophobic shit got written in them. He had ghostwriters, he didn't actually write a whole lot for it, and it also published a lot of stuff from other people, so I don't think he actually wrote any of the bad shit that bore his name as an author, but his excuses for how all that shit got published in his newsletters have changed over the years. From, saying that he just wasn't paying enough attention and it slipped through, to, some of it was taken out of context, to it's just hysterical slander from political enemies. But one of his associates who worked for the publication said, it's all bullshit. Ron Paul knew exactly what was going out and he let the controversial stuff go because it would boost profits. So I don't think Ron Paul personally holds any overtly racist or homophobic views, but I also don't think he's above exploiting those views to put some extra money in his pocket. Gotta make Ayn Rand proud. During this time, he went from being one of Reagan's earliest supporters to being one of Reagan's most ardent critics. So, that earned him some brownie points for me because fuck Reagan. He was basically one of the only Republicans to stand up and start calling out Reagan's absolutely atrocious economic policies and put Republican hypocrisy on blast, pointing out that every Republican voted against Jimmy Carter's $38 billion budget deficit and then immediately turned around and voted for and cheered on Reagan's $45 billion budget deficit like it was the greatest economic policy since the Wealth of Nations. Oh, and side note, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with this particular video. Reagan's proposed $45 billion budget deficit ended up being a $113 billion budget deficit. Just wanted to take a quick moment to point that out and remind everybody that Reagan is literally the devil, and fuck him and anybody who champions his economic policies. Back to the story. As a result of being fed up with Reagan and Republican hypocrisy, he left the Republican Party in 1987 to run for president as a libertarian. But being a third-party candidate, he was on the ballot in like 46 states and got 0.5% of the popular vote. This was arguably more of a protest campaign than a realistic bid to win the White House. Then, in 1997, the man with two first names decided to go back and run for his old House seat in Congress, again, as a Republican, again, and narrowly won it back despite the controversy of his newsletter days being used against him in the campaign. Ron Paul, who you'll recall was a big advocate of term limits, would go on to serve in Congress from 1998 to 2013. And during this time, he was about as utterly useless as a lawmaker as humanly possible. Of the well over 600 bills Ron Paul sponsored during his tenure in the House, one got signed into law. That one legislative accomplishment over his entire career was simply to allow a Historical Preservation Society to buy a federal customs house. He did have some better success pushing his agenda through bill amendments, where he basically just worked on blocking funding to things he didn't like in bills. Some of it was even pretty praiseworthy, like not allowing funding to go to surveillance activities for people exercising their First Amendment rights. In 1997, he tried impeaching Bill Clinton before it was cool, not because of the Monica Lewinsky thing, but because he felt that Clinton's military actions overseas were unconstitutional. And then when Clinton did get impeached over the Monica Lewinsky thing, he clarified that he wasn't voting to impeach Clinton over that, he was voting for the war crime stuff. And in my opinion, you know, time and place, dude, that was not it. That was a shit show that he shouldn't have participated in. But he's pretty much opposed all war efforts, including our invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, so if nothing else, he has some integrity and consistency on his anti-US interventionism and imperialism. Then in 2008, he'd run in the Republican presidential primary. He had some really solid grassroots support, a lot of individual donations, and a bunch of internet hype, but he couldn't translate that enthusiasm into any sort of successful primary campaign. By March, any mathematical possibility of him clinching the nomination was absolutely zero. Despite that, he stayed in the race against John McCain until June, and once he did withdraw, instead of endorsing John McCain, he wishy-washily supported basically every single third-party candidate out there before endorsing Chuck Baldwin of the Constitutionalist Party. In 2012, he'd run in the Republican primary again and had arguably more enthusiasm this time, getting third in the Iowa caucus behind Joseph Smith Jr. and anal discharge. But between newsletters from Christmas past coming to haunt him again, and his campaign manager getting caught bribing an Iowa state senator for an endorsement, his primary campaign pretty much fell apart after Iowa. By May, his campaign was running out of money and he more or less gave up. The following month, a bunch of his supporters got together and sued the RNC on his behalf because they didn't feel like he got a fair shake. He didn't formally support or discourage the lawsuit, and I don't think anything really ever came of it. Then, once the primary was over, in protest, Ron refused to speak at the Republican National Convention, refused to endorse Mitt Romney, saying there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans or Romney and Obama, you know, becoming that dude that nobody wants to talk to at the party. Since the 2012 loss, Ron has not run for public office and has spent his time in the public eye being blatantly ignored by his douchebag of a Kentucky senator's son, Rand Paul. And I like to believe that Ron Paul looks at Rand like Red Foreman looks at Eric. I actually feel pretty confident that he does. So my opinion on Ron Paul, had he actually found his way into the White House. I think he would have been as useless as a president as he was as a congressman, because first off, he really only gives a shit about economic policy. I think had he presided over a Democratic House and Senate, he would have indifferently allowed some good things to get passed. Civil rights-wise, anyway, he leans in support of them. I don't think he would have ever fought for them, but had they been put on his desk, I think he would have signed them. He's pretty anti-war, so I think he would have tried to remove us from any military conflict we were in while he was in office and prevent us from getting in any new military conflicts, so that's not so bad. But beyond that, I don't think he would have gotten anything done. Democrats would have never agreed to any of his fiscal policy. The Republicans would have probably been on board for his, tax cuts and spending cuts, but the party of fiscal responsibility is fucking incapable of putting forward a budget that doesn't have a record-setting deficit built into it, and I can't see Ron Paul approving a budget with a deficit, so I don't see his fiscal policy going anywhere, no matter what party was in power. However, if he did preside over a Republican House and Senate, I do think a lot of shit would have been deregulated, and that would have been bad. So it would have taken Obama over Ron Paul any day. I think that Ron Paul would have been an awful recession recovery president. But had he won in 88, I think he would have been either the same or a little better than Daddy Bush, because he probably would have kept us out of Desert Storm. Ultimately, I respect Ron Paul more than I respect most Republicans, and I don't respect Ron Paul. And also, I don't condone beating children or anything, but I do think he maybe should have considered some sort of alternative parenting techniques, because Rand is fucking awful. Also, calling Randall Rand is just a little on the nose for the kid of the libertarian poster child. Just saying, it's a bit much. Anyway, I'm done, and look forward to all the incredibly unhappy Ron Paul supporters in my comments.